Homemaking Through the Decades audiobook edition. The 1940s, Courage, Rations, and the Home Front. For the duration, the phrase that defined a decade. She rationed, she planted, she managed, she waited, and she held everything together while she did. The 1940s homemaker entered the decade already toughened by 10 years of Depression-era scarcity. She knew how to stretch a meal, mend a garment, and make do. What she could not have anticipated was that the decade would ask all of these skills of her again, this time in the service of a global war that would reach into every American kitchen in the form of ration books, victory gardens, and the daily uncertainty of not knowing where her husband, son, or brother was, or whether he was alive. The United States entered World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Within months, rationing programs were established for sugar, coffee, meat, butter, canned goods, shoes, and gasoline. The Office of Price Administration issued ration books to every American household. The homemaker was now a wartime logistics manager, balancing ration points alongside dollars and planning meals around what was available rather than what was desired. The war simultaneously pulled millions of women into the paid workforce. Women who had been full-time homemakers became factory workers, office workers, and service workers, and then came home and remained full-time homemakers as well. The double burden was real and exhausting, and it was carried with a patriotic willingness that the post-war culture would quickly forget when it sent women back to the kitchen and pretended they had never left. For the homemakers who remained at home, the majority still, the war reorganized domestic life around a single principle: nothing for yourself that could be given to the war effort. Fat drippings went to munitions factories. Tin cans were flattened and collected. Victory gardens produced vegetables so that commercially grown food could go to the troops. Nylon stockings, when they wore through, were repaired or abandoned because nylon was needed for parachutes. Every domestic decision was made against the backdrop of a larger emergency. Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. The wartime homemaker's motto and her daily practice. Wartime rationing transformed meal planning from a matter of preference into a matter of calculation. Each item in the ration book had a point value, and the homemaker had to allocate points across the week's meals the way a financial manager allocates a budget. Balancing needs against availability, splurging occasionally on something special, conserving for anticipated shortages. It was a genuine management skill, and millions of women developed it under real pressure. What was rationed and how? Sugar was rationed from May 1942 at 1 pound per person per week, later reduced. Coffee was rationed from November 1942 through July 1943 at 1 pound per person every 5 weeks. Meat, butter, fats, and cheese came under point rationing from March 1943. Canned goods were rationed by points, while fresh vegetables remained freely available. Shoes were limited to 3 pairs per person per year. Gasoline was controlled through the ABC sticker system. Nylon stockings were diverted to parachute production, and leg makeup took their place. And tin and aluminum were collected for war materials, meaning no new household goods were available. The Victory Garden was the decade's most important domestic contribution to the war effort. By 1943, Americans were growing 20 million victory gardens that produced approximately 1/3 of all vegetables consumed in the United States. The homemaker who planted her backyard, tended it through the summer, and canned its produce in the fall was making a genuine economic contribution, one that freed commercially grown food for military use and kept grocery store prices from rising further. Substitution cooking reached new heights under rationing. The Joy of Cooking and other standard cookbooks were supplemented by government-issued pamphlets that provided practical guidance on cooking with limited fat, sugar, and meat. Extending ground beef with oats or breadcrumbs, using molasses where sugar was called for, making meatless casseroles 2 nights a week. These were not Depression-era improvisations. They were patriotic acts, and the women who practiced them were told so regularly. The wartime kitchen's key strategies included meatless Tuesdays and Fridays to reduce meat consumption voluntarily. One-pot casseroles extended meat with vegetables and starches. Fat conservation meant every dripping was saved, rendered, and used. Sugar substitutes, corn syrup, molasses, honey, replaced rationed sugar. Canning was done at peak efficiency, preserving every garden vegetable. Powdered milk and eggs provided shelf-stable alternatives to fresh. Organ meat recipes used liver, heart, and kidney as unrationed protein, and community canning centers shared equipment for neighborhood preservation. The emotional landscape of the wartime homemaker's life was shaped by absence and anxiety. The husband at war, the son at sea, the brother in the Pacific. Their presence was felt as a sustained low-level dread that sharpened whenever the telegraph boy appeared on the street. The homemaker learned to read the news with a new kind of attention, following the geography of the war on a map she kept by the radio, trying to understand what the place names meant for the men she knew. She managed this anxiety by working. The Victory Garden was therapeutic as well as patriotic. The physical labor of planting and tending replaced worry with purpose. The Red Cross work, rolling bandages, knitting socks and scarves for servicemen, organizing fundraising events, gave her anxiety a productive outlet and connected her to a community of women in the same situation. Together was better than alone. The V-mail letter was the decade's lifeline. Paper was rationed too, so letters to and from servicemen were photographed and shrunk to save shipping space, then enlarged and printed at the receiving end. The homemaker who wrote letters to her husband every week, describing the garden, the children's achievements, the neighborhood news, the small domestic events that constituted a life continuing in his absence, was maintaining a connection across distance and danger that she could not otherwise reach. She wrote every week. She described the garden, the children, the neighbor's new baby. She wrote about ordinary things because ordinary things were what he was fighting to return to. Skills development. The war expanded the homemaker's technical skill set in ways that would have seemed unusual in peacetime. She learned to read and interpret ration books, a genuine bureaucratic skill. She learned to can meat as well as vegetables, an extension of preservation techniques into new territory. She learned to repair things that in better times would have been replaced, shoes resoled, appliances repaired rather than traded in clothing altered and recut to extend its life by years. The skills the 1940s required included ration book management, point accounting, and strategic allocation across the week and month. Meat extending, incorporating starches and vegetables into meat dishes so that 1 pound of ground beef fed 6. Victory garden cultivation as serious vegetable production for family use. Pressure canning of meats and low-acid vegetables. Clothing renovation, remaking adult clothing into children's garments. Fat rendering and conservation, wartime substitution baking, and morale management, maintaining household optimism under conditions of genuine uncertainty. The women who entered the paid workforce while maintaining their households developed a kind of organizational capacity that had no peacetime precedent. Managing a factory shift, childcare arrangements, a victory garden, home canning, and the household's rationing, simultaneously, week after week, required planning ability and physical endurance that post-war domesticity would make it easy to forget. Fun and creativity. The 1940s homemaker found her entertainment where she could. The movies remained the great escape, the Hollywood musical, the romantic drama, the comedy, and even with rationed gasoline, many women managed the trip to the local theater. The radio remained essential, soap operas, comedy programs, and news broadcasts that kept the war simultaneously present and at a manageable distance. The entertainment and creative life of the 1940s home found expression in many forms. Radio provided dramas, comedies, and news, the household's connection to the world. Movies offered Hollywood's golden age for 15 cents, escape and glamour in equal measure. USO and war relief organizing gave community purpose social pleasure. Knitting for the troops through Red Cross projects became social activity. Scrapbooking the war meant collecting newspaper clippings, letters, and photographs. Square dancing and community dances provided local entertainment without needing gasoline. Victory garden clubs had neighbors sharing seeds, produce, and knowledge. And letter writing became a genuine literary form. The wartime letter, with all it contained and all it carefully withheld, was among the most artful writing Americans produced in the 20th century. The USO dance and the community social replaced the dinner party as the decade's social currency. These events cost little or nothing, required no rationing of fuel to reach, and provided the human connection that wartime isolation made more necessary than ever. The homemaker who organized the neighborhood war bond drive or the Red Cross volunteer session was performing the same social function as the 1920s bridge club hostess, creating community, maintaining connection, but with a sense of larger purpose added. Modern trends and innovations. The war accelerated technological development in ways that would reshape domestic life in the following decades. Plastics, developed for military applications, would become ubiquitous in post-war kitchens. Frozen food technology, advanced to supply military operations, would transform how Americans thought about food storage. The microwave oven's eventual development traced back to radar research. The homemaker of 1945 could not see the post-war future, but she was living in its laboratory. The wartime innovations that would shape the future were numerous. Frozen food technology, developed by Clarence Birdseye and deployed at wartime scale, was on its way into civilian kitchens. Plastics from military applications were previewing the post-war plastic revolution. DDT, used as a pesticide in the Pacific Theater, would soon find domestic use, though its environmental consequences would become one of the following decade's critical revelations. Aerosol spray cans, developed for military insecticides, would soon appear in every kitchen. Early versions of disposable diapers traced back to wartime materials research. Instant coffee, developed for troops through Nescafé, would enter civilian kitchens after the war. Penicillin, the military medical miracle, would transform post-war public health. And television, suspended during the war, was poised for explosive post-war expansion. The conversion of wartime industrial capacity to peacetime production would drive the prosperity of the late 1940s and the 1950s. The women who had spent the war years managing scarcity would suddenly find themselves consumers in the most affluent economy in world history. The adjustment would be complicated, psychologically as well as practically. Having learned to do without, some found abundance unsettling. Having been told they were essential to the war effort, many found the return to domestic privacy insufficient. Cost of living. In 1943, a loaf of bread cost 9 cents, a dozen eggs was 53 cents, a quart of milk was 31 cents. A pound of butter ran 53 cents plus ration points. A pound of beef was 40 cents plus points. A pound of coffee, when available, was 28 cents. Sugar was 6 cents a pound when ration supplies permitted. Flour was 32 cents for 5 pounds. Lard was 13 cents a pound plus points. The average weekly family grocery budget was $12 to $15, plus ration points. A movie ticket was 25 cents. A Series E war bond cost $18.75 for a $25 face value. Women's factory wages ran 40 to 65 cents an hour. Average family income in 1944 was $2,400 a year. Wartime inflation was real, but controlled by Office of Price Administration regulations that set maximum prices on most goods. The black market existed. Some merchants sold rationed goods above the legal price to customers willing to pay, but most homemakers refused to participate, both from patriotism and from a practical understanding that supporting the black market undermined the rationing system that was making equitable distribution possible. The war created a community of shared purpose that was unlike anything peacetime America had produced. The knowledge that every family on the block had someone away in the service, that every neighbor was managing the same rations and the same anxiety, produced a solidarity that dissolved some of the social distances that had previously kept neighborhoods compartmentalized by class and ethnicity. Community life in the 1940s was organized around the war effort. Block wartime committees organized local rationing compliance and aid. Red Cross volunteer chapters handled bandage rolling, blood drives, and fundraising. USO volunteer work provided entertainment and hospitality to servicemen. Neighborhood Victory Garden cooperatives shared space, tools, and knowledge. War bond drives combined community fundraising with social events. Church networks provided food assistance and community support. Women's labor union auxiliaries supported wartime workers' families, and letter writing campaigns had neighbors writing collectively to local servicemen. Family and relationships. The wartime family was frequently incomplete. Fathers away at war, older brothers at sea, uncles and cousins deployed across multiple theaters. The household that the 1940s homemaker managed was often a household of women, children, and older relatives, with the male breadwinner present only in photographs, letters, and the persistent hope of return. Children grew up faster during the war. They understood from an early age the significance of the Blue Star service flag in the window, one star for each family member in active service, gold if that member had been killed. They participated in scrap metal drives, saved their allowances for war bonds, grew accustomed to a domestic life from which the central male figure was absent. The homemaker who managed this reduced household while also explaining the war and its costs to children who were old enough to understand and young enough to be frightened was doing work of extraordinary complexity. Family life in the 1940s home was shaped by absence and adaptation. Fathers away at war meant women managed households alone for years. Children contributed to the home front through scrap drives, victory gardens, and war bonds. Multi-generational households had grandparents filling the gaps left by absent fathers. Wartime marriages were often hasty, a wedding before deployment, then years of separation. War widows managed alone permanently, dependent on community support. Children born during fathers' leaves sometimes met their fathers as strangers upon return. In a tea. Rationing became a family lesson, with children learning resource management early, and female correspondents maintained family connection across the world. Seasonal homemaking. The war organized the seasonal year around the Victory Garden and the canning calendar as thoroughly as the Depression had. Spring meant planting and planting. Summer meant tending and the beginning of preserving. Late summer and fall were the canning season, the months when the year's food security for winter was put up jar by jar in the pressure canner. The homemaker who canned 300 quarts of vegetables and fruit by October 1st could face winter with confidence. The wartime seasonal year had a clear structure. Spring, victory garden planning, seed ordering, early planting. Early summer, tending the garden, first vegetables, strawberry jam. High summer, peak preservation, beans, tomatoes, corn, cucumbers. Late summer, peaches, apples, pickles, root vegetable storage. Autumn, final canning and inventory of the year's put-up food. Winter, knitting for troops, Red Cross work, letter writing. And year-round, ration book management, fat conservation, and clothing renovation. Christmas during wartime acquired a particular emotional weight. The homemaker who managed a Christmas celebration with a rationed sugar supply, a husband or son away in service, and children who understood better than they should what was at stake was performing a kind of domestic heroism. The decorated tree, the carefully managed holiday meal, the packages sent overseas to servicemen, these were not trivial domestic activities. They were assertions of normalcy in the face of its absence, and they mattered enormously. Homemaking and personal growth. The 1940s homemaker emerged from the war decade having demonstrated capacities she had not known she possessed. She had managed a household under sustained difficulty. She had maintained her family's emotional health through years of uncertainty. She had contributed in measurable ways to a national effort that succeeded. And then, in one of history's more complicated domestic moments, she was asked to go back to the kitchen and be grateful. The post-war culture's insistence on returning women to the domestic sphere was partly economic. Returning servicemen needed jobs, partly ideological, and partly a collective attempt to forget the complications that the war had introduced into settled gender arrangements. Most women went along with it, at least outwardly. The private knowledge of what they had been capable of went with them into the kitchen, where it informed their domestic practice in ways that the culture around them largely declined to acknowledge. What the 1940s built in the homemaker was substantial and lasting. Rationing intelligence, the ability to plan under strict resource constraints. Patriotic purpose, understanding domestic work as civic contribution. Emotional resilience, sustaining household morale through extended uncertainty, industrial scale preservation, substitution mastery, community organizing skills, independent household management, and above all, the knowledge of her own capability, tested and confirmed under real conditions. That knowledge could not be taken away. It happens. Even amid wartime gravity, the small domestic disasters continued. Even amid wartime gravity, the small domestic disasters continued, mastered the technique, and wore her painted seams to church every Sunday with great dignity. The technique worked beautifully until the Sunday it rained, and she walked home with her Sunday best legs streaking in the most unbecoming direction. She wore ankle socks to church for the rest of the war. Step into their shoes. It is a Tuesday morning in November 1943, and she has received a letter. V-mail, small and slightly blurry from the photographic process, but his handwriting. She knows his handwriting the way she knows his voice. He is well. He cannot say where he is, the censors have cut out the location. But he is well, and he is thinking about her and about the children and about the house. He says he dreams about her apple pie. She puts the letter in the box with the others, 43 now, since June of 1942, and starts the day. The children need breakfast. There is oatmeal, which stretches the sugar ration adequately, and powdered milk, which is not the same as fresh milk, but which the children have stopped complaining about, which is its own kind of adaptation. After breakfast, she consults the ration book. She has 14 red points left for the week: meat, butter, and fats, and plans carefully. She will buy chicken, which is unrationed, for Sunday dinner. The rationed points will go to butter for baking and a small amount of beef for Saturday's stew. She has learned to think about the ration book the way she used to think about the household budget, a fixed resource requiring intelligent allocation. The morning is for the Victory Garden. Even in November, there are things to do, the remaining root vegetables to dig, the beds to prepare for spring. She works in the cold until 10, then comes in and starts the canning she has been postponing. The last of the tomatoes, 23 quarts, which will see them through February at least. In the afternoon, she knits. The Red Cross asks for socks and scarves for servicemen, and she knits while she listens to the soap operas. One ear on the drama of what's on the radio, one part of her mind in the Pacific with him. The knitting gives her hands something to do while the rest of her waits. The children come home from school at 3:30, and she puts aside the uncertainty. There are lessons to supervise, dinner to make, the ordinary business of the household to conduct. This is what she does. This is how she holds it together, by doing the next thing, and then the next thing after that, until it is evening and the children are in bed and she can take out his letter and read it once more. Her week, November 1943, Monday, laundry day, fat drippings collected for the collection drive. Tuesday, V-mail received, Victory Garden cleanup, 23 quarts of tomatoes canned. Wednesday, market day, careful ration point allocation, chicken purchased. Thursday, Red Cross volunteer session, scarf knitting completed. Friday, baking day, bread, cookies within the sugar ration. Saturday, beef stew using ration points, children's baths, letters written. Sunday, chicken dinner, letters received and reread, war map updated. Recipes from the 1940s. These are genuinely good recipes made under genuinely difficult conditions. The wartime kitchen was a place of real skill and real invention. These recipes come from the wartime kitchen, making the most of rationed ingredients, finding ways to provide pleasure within constraint, and demonstrating that patriotic cooking could still be genuinely good cooking. Victory Garden vegetable soup. This recipe was promoted by the Office of War Information as a way to use fresh garden vegetables and reduce dependence on rationed canned goods. It is infinitely adaptable to whatever the garden offers, nourishing and genuinely delicious. The secret is the long, slow simmer. Ingredients: 2 tablespoons of reserved meat drippings or lard, 1 onion diced, 2 stalks of celery diced, 2 carrots diced, 2 cloves of garlic, 1 cup of trimmed green beans, 2 cups of tomatoes, fresh or home canned, 2 medium potatoes diced, 1 cup of corn kernels, 6 cups of water or weak broth, salt, pepper, and herbs. Directions: heat the drippings in a large pot and sauté the onion, celery, and carrot until soft. Add garlic and cook 1 minute more. Add tomatoes, potatoes, green beans, and water. Bring to a boil, reduce to a simmer, and cook 30 minutes. Add corn and simmer 10 minutes more. Season generously and serve with homemade bread. This soup improves the next day and feeds a large family economically. Wartime meatloaf. Extended ground beef was rationed by points, so every pound was extended as far as possible. Oats, breadcrumbs, or cracker crumbs were standard extenders. They bind the loaf, absorb moisture, and allow a pound of beef to serve 6 people. This recipe was widely circulated in government pamphlets. Ingredients: 3/4 of a pound of ground beef, 3/4 cup of rolled oats or fresh breadcrumbs, 1 egg, if available, or 2 tablespoons of powdered egg mixed with water, 1 small onion grated, 1 cup of canned or stewed tomatoes, 1 teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of pepper, 1 teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce. Directions: preheat the oven to 350 degrees. Combine all ingredients and mix thoroughly. Press into a loaf pan and spread a little ketchup or tomato sauce on top. Bake 1 hour until firm and browned. Let rest 10 minutes before slicing. Serve 6. Leftovers make excellent cold sandwiches the next day. Eggless, butterless chocolate cake. With eggs and butter rationed, bakers adapted. This version of the wacky cake circulated widely in wartime homemaking guides as a reliable solution to the dessert problem. Ingredients: 1½ cups of flour, 1 cup of sugar, 3 tablespoons of cocoa, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, half a teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 1 tablespoon of vinegar, 6 tablespoons of vegetable shortening unrationed, 1 cup of cold water. Directions: preheat the oven to 350 degrees. Sift dry ingredients directly into an ungreased 9x9 pan. Make 3 wells and add vanilla, vinegar, and melted shortening to separate wells. Pour water over all and stir until just combined. Bake for 30 to 35 minutes. Cool in the pan. Frost with a cocoa water glaze if sugar allows, or serve plain. What we learned, and what we still use today. The wartime homemaker's legacy is complicated by the post-war culture's decision to pretend the war years hadn't happened to women the way they had. The women who had managed alone, worked double shifts, organized communities, and held families together through years of genuine danger were sent home with a refrigerator and a baby and told that this was what they had always wanted. Many of them accepted the arrangement, at least outwardly, and built the suburban domestic culture of the 1950s with the skills and knowledge they had developed in the hardest conditions. Lessons from the 1940s we still use today. Keep a well-stocked pantry. The wartime homemaker, who had put up 300 jars, faced winter with confidence. Your pantry is your peace of mind. Understand what you can do without. Rationing taught what was essential and what was optional. That clarity is useful long after the ration books are gone. Write letters. The V-mail letters of the 1940s maintained relationships across distances and dangers that phone calls and texts cannot fully replicate. A written letter is an object of care. Grow something. The Victory Garden was practical, therapeutic, and community building. A kitchen garden remains all three. Extend what you have. The 1940s meatloaf stretched a pound of beef into 6 servings. Understanding how to make less go further is a permanent life skill. Community is not optional. The block committees, Red Cross chapters, and neighborhood networks of the 1940s were the social infrastructure that made the private sacrifice bearable. She kept the letters, all 43 of them, tied with a piece of kitchen twine, in the box on the high shelf in the bedroom closet. When he came home, and he did come home, in August 1945, thinner than when he left and quieter in ways she learned to read, she did not show him the box. She just made his apple pie. She kept the letters. When he came home, she made his apple pie. Some things don't require explanation.